The night was deep and still. The wind that crossed the Aegean carried the scent of smoke and victory. Far away, the city of Troy burned, towers collapsing, temples glowing in the dark. The war was over, but the story was not. For 10 long years, the Greeks had fought for glory, pride, and the promise of home. Kings had fallen, heroes had vanished, and gods had chosen their favorites. And among those who survived stood one man, Odysseus, king of Ithaca. He was not the strongest of warriors, nor the most blessed by the gods. But his mind was sharper than any sword. It was his cunning that ended the war, the wooden horse that broke the gates of Troy. Yet as the fires died behind him, Odysseus could not know that his true battle was only beginning. A journey that would stretch across 10 more years. Through storms, monsters, and the wrath of gods. A journey not just across the sea but through the depths of the human spirit. This is not just a tale of adventure. It is the story of longing, loss, and endurance. Of a man who conquered Troy, yet struggled to find his way home. This is the Odyssey. The story of a hero whose greatest war was against time, fate, and himself. For 10 long years, the war between the Greeks and the Trojans had consumed everything. Cities had fallen silent, fields had turned to dust, and the sea itself seemed tired of carrying ships back and forth across its endless waves. No one remembered how it began anymore, whether it was love, pride, or the will of the gods that had drawn so many men to this cursed shore. At the heart of it all stood the mighty city of Troy, its walls said to be built by the hands of gods. For a decade, no siege engine, no sword, no army had broken its gates. The Trojans had endured, and the Greeks had grown weary. Among them was Odysseus, king of the small island of Ithaca, a man known not for his strength but for his mind. While warriors like Achilles and Ajax sought glory in battle, Odysseus sought something different, a way to end the war. He was a thinker, a planner, a man who understood that sometimes the mind could win where the sword could not. And so, as the Greeks prepared to abandon their hopeless siege, Odysseus conceived a plan. Something daring, something that would trick even the gods if they were watching. He proposed building a massive wooden horse, tall as the city's towers, hollow from within. A gift, he said, an offering to the goddess Athena for their safe return home. The Greeks would pretend to sail away, leaving the horse behind on the beach. Inside its wooden belly, Odysseus and a handful of the bravest soldiers would hide, waiting for nightfall and the moment of fate. The plan was met with disbelief, then awe. And soon the sound of hammers and saws echoed across the Greek camp. When the horse was finished, it stood as a monument of false peace. The Greek ships slipped quietly into the horizon, hidden behind a nearby island. From the walls of Troy, the Trojans saw only empty beaches and the mysterious wooden figure gleaming in the sun. The war, it seemed, was over. Troy erupted in joy. Gates that had stayed shut for 10 years were opened. Mothers embraced their sons. Fires were lit. Songs filled the air. They had won. But amid the celebration, one man stood uneasy, Laocoon, a priest of Poseidon. He looked at the horse and saw not a gift but a trap. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts, he warned. There is deceit in every plank of that wood. Yet the gods had other plans. At that very moment, 2 great serpents rose from the sea, coiling around Laocoon and his sons, crushing the life from them before vanishing beneath the waves. The Trojans saw it as punishment for blasphemy. If the gods had silenced the priest, surely the horse was sacred. And so, in triumph and faith, they pulled the wooden giant through their gates. That night, Troy celebrated as it never had before. Wine flowed freely, songs of victory echoed through the streets. The city that had defied 1,000 ships finally rested. But high inside the horse's hollow chest, Odysseus and his men waited in silence. Hearts pounding, breaths shallow, surrounded by darkness and the faint sounds of laughter below. When the moon rose high and the city's fires burned low, Odysseus gave the signal. The hatch opened quietly. One by one the Greeks climbed down, their feet touching the sacred streets of Troy. They moved like shadows, unseen and unstoppable. The guards were asleep. The gates were opened. And from the distant shore, where the hidden fleet had waited all along, the Greek ships returned, sails black against the silver sea. Within hours Troy was burning. Cries of terror replaced the music. Temples crumbled, palaces fell. The city that had once defied the world now drowned in its own flames. Odysseus moved through the chaos with grim purpose. He had won, yet as he watched the destruction, a strange heaviness settled over him. This was victory, yes, but also the birth of a curse. For in deceiving Troy, he had also angered the gods, especially Poseidon, the earth shaker, who had loved the Trojans for their devotion. When dawn broke, the smoke of Troy rose high into the sky, a warning to all who challenged the will of Olympus. The Greeks divided their spoils, mourning their dead and prepared to return home. Odysseus longed to see his wife, Penelope, and his young son, Telemachus. He could already imagine the shores of Ithaca, the olive trees, the hills, the familiar scent of the sea. He did not know that the road home would stretch beyond all reason, that his name would be remembered not only as the destroyer of Troy but as the wanderer of endless seas. For the war of men had ended. But the war between man and gods was only beginning. The smoke of Troy still drifted across the horizon when the Greek ships began their long journey home. The beaches that had once echoed with the clash of swords now lay silent, littered with ashes, broken armor, and memories of a war that had consumed a generation. Among the fleet that sailed away was the ship of Odysseus, king of Ithaca. His heart was restless, torn between the victory he had won and the faces he had lost. He longed to see the green hills of his island, his faithful wife Penelope, and his young son Telemachus, whom he had left as a child 10 years ago. The wind was kind that morning. The sails filled, the waves sparkled under the sun, and the men laughed for the first time in years. But the gods, they were watching. And not all of them were pleased. For in the destruction of Troy, Odysseus had angered one who ruled the vast seas, Poseidon the earth-shaker. The god had loved the Trojans, and when Odysseus blinded Poseidon's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, the bond of peace was forever broken. Though that moment was yet to come, the curse had already begun to form, a whisper carried on the wind, unseen and unheard. As Odysseus's fleet sailed onward, the first signs of divine discontent appeared. The sky darkened without warning, and the calm sea turned restless. Lightning flickered far in the distance, and the men looked at one another with unease. "Is it the wrath of the gods?" one sailor whispered. Odysseus raised his eyes to the horizon. "Perhaps," he murmured. "Or perhaps the gods test us, to see if victory has made us blind." The storm came quickly, violent and merciless. Waves crashed against the ships, tearing sails and snapping masts. Men shouted prayers into the wind, calling to Athena, Zeus, and Poseidon, not knowing which god would hear them, or which would laugh. Odysseus took the helm, shouting orders above the roar of thunder. "Hold the ropes. Cut what you must. Keep her steady." His voice was firm, commanding. But even he felt the chill of something greater, not a storm of nature but of fate. Hours passed in chaos until at last the sea began to calm. The wind softened, the rain thinned to a mist. When dawn arrived, Odysseus found his ships scattered, half of them lost to the night's fury. Those who remained alive clung to what was left, shivering under the pale morning light. They had been blown far off course to a chain of islands unknown to them, a place of strange cliffs and whispering winds. The men built fires on the shore and offered sacrifices to the gods, begging for mercy and direction. And then came a messenger of the divine, Hermes, swift-footed and radiant, descending through the clouds. The men fell to their knees in awe. Hermes spoke not to them but to Odysseus alone. "Son of Laertes," he said, "the gods are divided in your fate. Athena still watches over you, but Poseidon has sworn you shall not see Ithaca until your heart has learned humility. The sea is his domain and you have defied it. Beware the path ahead. The winds you seek will not always carry you home." With that, Hermes vanished, leaving behind the faint shimmer of light and the whisper of wings. Odysseus bowed his head. He understood now. His journey was not just a return. It was a test written by the gods themselves. Days later, the fleet reached the island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. The island rose like a fortress from the sea, its cliffs bright with sunlight, its air heavy with the scent of salt and flowers. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus warmly, having heard of his wisdom and cunning. During their stay, Odysseus told the tale of Troy, of the horse, of the long war that had ended in fire. Aeolus listened with deep respect and pity. "You are clever, son of Ithaca," he said, "but cleverness alone cannot calm the sea. Take this gift." He handed Odysseus a great leather bag tied with silver cords. "Inside are all the winds that could harm your voyage. Keep them sealed, and you shall have fair passage home." Grateful and hopeful, Odysseus accepted the gift. For 9 days they sailed under clear skies, the stars bright above them, Ithaca almost within reach. Odysseus had not slept, his eyes fixed on the horizon, imagining the embrace of home. But fate is cruel to those who let down their guard. On the 10th night, exhausted from the journey, Odysseus finally closed his eyes. His men, seeing the mysterious bag tied beside him, whispered among themselves. "Gold," one said. "Silver," Another guest. He keeps the treasure of Troy for himself. Curiosity overcame reason. While their captain slept, they untied the cords. The winds burst out with a howl that shook the sea. The ships spun wildly, tossed like leaves in a storm. The men cried out, but it was too late. The bag emptied, releasing every wind that Aeolus had sealed away. By dawn, Ithaca was gone, a dream once again lost to the horizon. When Odysseus awoke, despair filled him. The island he had seen with his own eyes now lay far behind, carried away by their folly. He fell to his knees and wept, not from weakness but from the crushing weight of fate. Back on Aeolus's island, he begged for help once more, but the Keeper of Winds shook his head. You have angered the gods, Odysseus. I cannot aid one who is cursed by them. So he turned away, forced again upon the open sea, toward unknown waters and unseen dangers. The war of Troy had ended. But the war within Odysseus, between pride and patience, between man and the will of the gods, had only just begun. And far beneath the waves Poseidon watched, silent, waiting, his trident resting on the ocean floor, the storm in his heart growing stronger with every beat of the sailor's oar. The sea had grown calm again, but in its silence there was no comfort. Odysseus and his men drifted across waters that seemed endless, blue by day, black by night, and haunted by the whispers of gods. The stars above were their only map, the winds their only guide. Days turned to weeks. Their food ran low and their spirits lower still. They had escaped storms and angered gods, but now a greater danger crept upon them, the danger of forgetting why they sailed at all. Then one morning the mist lifted and revealed a small island, lush, green and shimmering under the sunlight. Palm trees swayed gently, and sweet fragrances drifted across the air. It seemed peaceful, untouched by war or sorrow. Odysseus ordered his men to anchor the ships. We will rest here, he said. But be cautious. Beauty can hide danger. As they set foot on the island, the warmth of the sand and the softness of the breeze felt like a dream. Birds sang above, and a river ran through fields of golden flowers. The men laughed for the first time in many days, drinking the cool water and feeling the weight of their journey ease from their hearts. Soon they saw figures approaching, the lotus eaters, the island's gentle inhabitants. Their faces were calm, their eyes distant, as if they lived between waking and dreaming. They welcomed the strangers with smiles and offered them fruit unlike any they had seen, pale golden blossoms shaped like stars. This is the lotus, one of them said softly. Taste it and your heart will know peace. Some of Odysseus's men, too hungry and too tired to refuse, accepted the gift. They bit into the fruit, and in an instant their eyes changed. The tension in their faces melted away. Their laughter became strange, dreamlike. They sat down among the lotus eaters, gazing out to sea without recognition or care. The ships, the journey, Ithaca, all of it faded like mist in the morning sun. Hours passed before Odysseus realized his men had not returned. He went in search of them, walking through fields of lotus flowers that swayed in the wind like waves of gold. The air itself seemed heavy, laced with a strange sweetness that pulled at his mind. He found them sitting by the shore, smiling faintly, their eyes distant. Come, he said gently. We must go. But they only shook their heads. We are home, one whispered. There is no need to leave, said another. The sea brings only pain. Here there is peace. Odysseus felt a chill deeper than any storm. You are bewitched, he said, his voice hardening. You have eaten of forgetfulness. He tried to reason with them, but their hearts were no longer his. The lotus had stolen their memories, their wives, their children, their dreams of return. All replaced by a tranquil emptiness. Odysseus knew then that if they stayed even a little longer, he too would forget. The scent of the flowers was already clouding his thoughts, filling him with a strange longing to rest, to stop fighting, to let the waves of time take him wherever they wished. But deep within him, a voice, perhaps Athena's, perhaps his own, whispered, "Remember who you are." With sudden resolve, he seized his men one by one, dragging them toward the ships as they pleaded to stay. They wept, they resisted, but Odysseus's strength and will were greater. He tied them to the benches of the ship and ordered the others to push off at once. The oars struck the water. Slowly the island began to fade behind them, its golden fields glowing in the distance, the lotus eaters waving softly as if in farewell. The wind caught their sails, carrying them once more into the open sea. As the sun set, the bewitched men lay silent, staring into the waves. Gradually the spell began to break. Their eyes cleared, confusion returning with memory. Some cried quietly, realizing what they had almost lost. Odysseus sat apart, watching the horizon. He knew the island would haunt them, not for its danger but for its peace. For it offered what every man secretly desired, rest from suffering and end to longing. Yet he also knew that such peace was a lie. Better to suffer and remember, he murmured, than to forget and live in comfort. The sea answered with a sigh. The stars began to appear one by one, ancient and unchanging. Somewhere beyond them lay Ithaca, small, distant but real. And so they sailed on, hearts heavy but awake, guided once again by the faint hope of home. The island of the Lotus Eaters faded into legend, a place where time slept and men forgot who they were. But Odysseus carried the memory like a warning, carved deep into his soul. For he had seen what it meant to lose one's purpose. And he knew that before he could face monsters and gods, he would have to conquer the most dangerous enemy of all, the desire to stop fighting. After escaping the island of the Lotus Eaters, Odysseus and his men once again sailed across the vast, unpredictable sea. The waters shimmered under the fading sun, but the hearts of his men were heavy. The strange peace of the Lotus Island still haunted them, a paradise that promised rest but demanded forgetfulness. Now hunger and curiosity pushed them toward another unknown shore, one that would test their courage and cleverness more than ever before. The ships drifted toward a rugged coastline marked by towering cliffs and caves that seemed to breathe darkness. Smoke rose faintly from one of the hills, and the scent of roasting meat reached them across the breeze. Odysseus, ever curious, decided to explore. He chose 12 of his bravest men and set off, carrying goatskins of wine given to him by Marin, the priest of Apollo, a fine, potent drink meant for diplomacy or deception. As they walked inland, they found fields of grain, wild goats grazing, and pens filled with sheep and rams. The land seemed rich but strangely quiet, no voices, no villages, no songs. It felt like a forgotten corner of the world, ruled by something both powerful and primitive. Odysseus's men urged him to take the livestock and leave before whoever lived there returned. But Odysseus, driven by that dangerous mix of boldness and curiosity, insisted they wait. "I wish to see the owner of this land," he said. "Perhaps he will offer us hospitality, or gifts as custom demands." So they entered one of the largest caves they could find, a vast hollow chamber with milk-filled bowls, hanging cheeses and stacks of wood for fire. They marveled at the abundance and built a small fire to cook a meal while they waited. But before they could finish, the ground began to tremble. A heavy shadow fell across the cave's mouth. Then they saw him, the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon. His huge form blocked the light, one monstrous eye blazing in the center of his forehead. He carried an enormous bundle of firewood, which he threw down with a crash that made the cave echo. The men froze in terror. Polyphemus turned toward them, sniffing the air like a beast. "Who are you, strangers?" his voice thundered. "Thieves or travelers?" Odysseus stepped forward, heart pounding but mind sharp. "We are Greeks returning from Troy," he said. "We ask only for food and shelter as guests under the law of the gods." The Cyclops laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "We care not for your gods here," he growled. "We are stronger than they." Then, to the horror of the men, Polyphemus reached out, grabbed 2 of them, and smashed them against the floor before devouring them raw. The cave filled with the sound of bones breaking. The men cried out, but Polyphemus only laughed again, rolled a massive stone across the entrance and lay down to sleep. Odysseus's courage wavered. He knew they could not move the stone, it was too large for even 20 men to budge. They were trapped. But he would not surrender. As the night dragged on, he began to think and plan. When morning came, Polyphemus ate 2 more of the crew and drove his flock outside, rolling the stone away only long enough to let them pass. The men waited in despair until the giant returned again at night, herding his sheep back inside. As he settled, Odysseus stepped forward with a calm voice. "Cyclops," he said, "you have eaten my friends, but I bring you a gift. Taste our finest wine, made by men who honor their hosts." Polyphemus sniffed the jar, curious. He drank deeply, once, twice, 3 times, until the potent wine clouded his mind. His single eye drooped and his voice grew heavy. "You are brave, little man," he slurred. "Tell me your name that I may give you a gift." Odysseus smiled faintly. "My name is Nobody," he said. The Cyclops laughed and soon collapsed into drunken sleep, his snores shaking the walls. Then Odysseus whispered to his men. They took a long wooden staff, sharpened its tip in the fire, and waited until it glowed red-hot. Together they drove it into Polyphemus's eye. The cave roared with his scream. He thrashed wildly, tearing at the air, calling for help from the other Cyclopes who lived nearby. When they came running, they called out, Polyphemus, who hurts you?" And he bellowed in agony, "Nobody. Nobody is hurting me." Thinking he was cursed by the gods, they left him to his madness. By dawn Odysseus was ready. As Polyphemus groaned in pain, he rolled the stone aside to let his sheep out, feeling them one by one with his hands. But Odysseus had tied his men beneath the bellies of the rams, hiding them from the giant's touch. When the last sheep passed, they slipped free and ran for their ship. As they rowed away from the shore, Polyphemus's voice thundered from the cliffs. "Hear me, Poseidon. Curse Odysseus. May he never reach his home, or if he must, let it be long and full of suffering." Odysseus, proud and reckless, could not resist one last taunt. "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, king of Ithaca." Polyphemus howled in rage and hurled a massive boulder into the sea, missing the ship by mere feet. The waves tossed them like leaves, but at last the island faded into the distance. Odysseus sat silently at the stern, the weight of his choices heavy on his heart. He had survived, yes, through wit and courage, but he had also earned the wrath of a god. And though the sea was calm again, the horizon seemed darker than ever before. The sea once again swallowed Odysseus and his weary crew. The waves rolled endlessly, their white crests glimmering like ghosts of the men they had lost. After escaping the wrath of the Cyclops, they sailed for days through shifting winds and restless skies, seeking any sign of land. The memory of Polyphemus's curse still haunted Odysseus, a shadow in every storm, a whisper in every wave. He knew Poseidon had heard, and that the god's vengeance was not yet done. Then one morning as the mist lifted, a new island appeared on the horizon, green and golden, shining under the sunlight like a jewel. The men felt both awe and suspicion, for beauty in these seas often hid danger. But hunger and exhaustion pushed them toward it. The island was home to Circe, the enchantress who could turn men into beasts. Odysseus ordered the ships to anchor near a sheltered cove. The air smelled of flowers and fresh rain, a strange peace settling over the shore. As they explored, they found gentle streams and wild birds but no signs of people. From the top of a hill, they saw smoke rising from a mansion deep in the woods, a palace carved of polished stone, glimmering in the sunlight. Odysseus divided his men. Half would stay with the ships, the other half, led by Eurylochus, would go to explore. As they neared the mansion they heard singing, a woman's voice, clear and haunting, weaving through the trees like a spell. Curious, the men followed the sound. They found Circe in a marble hall, surrounded by tame lions and wolves that gazed at them with human-like eyes. Yet the beasts did not attack. Instead, they wagged their tails and brushed against the strangers like pets. Circe, beautiful and calm, welcomed them warmly. "You must be weary from the sea," she said with a smile. "Come eat and drink." Her golden hair glowed in the firelight as she poured wine into shining cups. The men, enchanted by her grace, forgot their caution. They ate eagerly roasted meats, honeyed bread, and rich wine. But as they drank, Circe waved her wand and murmured ancient words. Before Eurylochus' horrified eyes, his men began to change. Their faces twisted, their limbs shrank, and in moments they were no longer men but squealing pigs. Their weapons fell clattering to the floor as Circe laughed softly and her servants herded the beasts into pens. Eurylochus alone escaped, running through the forest in terror. When he reached the shore, he told Odysseus what had happened. The others were stunned. Some wanted to flee, but Odysseus's resolve hardened. "I will bring them back," he said, "even if I must face her magic myself." As he strode toward the forest, a figure appeared before him, young, radiant, and winged. It was Hermes, messenger of the gods. "Odysseus of Ithaca," he said, "you are walking into danger. Circe's magic is strong, but take this." He handed Odysseus a small black root, moly, the herb that could resist enchantment. "Eat it before you face her, and her spell will fail." Odysseus thanked the god and pressed on. When he entered Circe's hall, she welcomed him just as before, her beauty calm and inviting. "You too shall dine," she said, offering him a golden cup. But Odysseus, protected by the herb, drank the potion and did not change. When Circe lifted her wand to strike, he drew his sword, the blade flashing in the light. "Release my men," he demanded. Circe froze, astonished that her magic had failed. For the first time fear touched her face. Then she smiled, not in mockery but in admiration. "Ah," she said softly, "you must be Odysseus, the man of many wiles. Put away your sword. You have nothing to fear here." Still cautious, Odysseus lowered his weapon. Circe led him through the halls, and with another wave of her wand, she restored his men to human form. They stumbled forward, confused and ashamed but alive. Tears filled their eyes as they embraced their captain. What followed was not more conflict but rest, a rare mercy. Circe, now kind and welcoming, invited them to stay. Her palace became a place of healing. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The men feasted, bathed, and forgot the cruel winds of the sea. Even Odysseus, though restless at heart, found comfort in Circe's company. She spoke of the gods and the hidden paths of the world, her voice both wise and sorrowful. But time moved strangely on. A year passed before Odysseus realized how long they had lingered. His men, their strength renewed, began to long for home again. One night, Odysseus sat with Circe under the stars and told her of Ithaca, of Penelope, his faithful wife, and Telemachus, his son growing up without him. Circe listened silently, her eyes soft with understanding. At last she said, "If you truly wish to return home, you must first travel to the land of the dead. There you will seek the spirit of the blind prophet Tiresias. Only he can tell you the path that leads to Ithaca." The words chilled Odysseus, but he nodded. He had faced monsters and storms, now he would face the shadows of the underworld itself. Circe gave him detailed instructions: how to summon the dead, what sacrifices to make, and how to protect himself from the spirits. When dawn came, the men prepared their ship once more. Circe stood on the shore as they departed, her long hair flowing in the wind, her face unreadable. She had been both a captor and a guide, a test of Odysseus's strength and his heart. As the ship drifted away, Odysseus looked back at the island one last time. The sea shimmered with strange calm, as if hiding what was yet to come. Ahead lay darkness, the realm of the dead, and beyond that, perhaps, home. After escaping the shadows of the underworld, Odysseus and his crew sailed onward through seas that glittered with deceptive calm. The warnings of Tiresias and Circe echoed in his mind. Dangers lay not only in storms and monsters, but in the seductive power of the unknown. And now the next peril approached, the sirens whose song lured men to destruction, whose voices promised knowledge and pleasure, yet delivered only death. The sea around them seemed to shimmer with an unnatural beauty as the coast of the Sirens' Island appeared. Jagged rocks jutted like the teeth of some hidden beast, and the water ran dark between them. A golden haze settled over the cliffs, giving the illusion of a paradise, yet Odysseus knew better. He had been warned, and the memory of the dead, of loved ones lost, steeled his resolve. Odysseus gave precise orders. "Block your ears with beeswax and tie me to the mast," he instructed. The men obeyed silently, preparing for what they could not see. Odysseus, curious and brave, wanted to hear the siren's song himself, yet he trusted in the chains to keep him safe. As they drew closer, a melody rose from the cliffs, soft, distant at first, then swelling with a clarity that seemed to pierce the very air. It was not merely a song, it was a promise, a whisper of secrets the world had never told, a vision of every desire fulfilled. The sirens sang of Troy, of Odysseus' home, of lost friends, and of power beyond imagining. Odysseus struggled against his bonds. The chains bit into his wrists, and his heart pounded as the voices grew sweeter, weaving visions of Ithaca before his eyes. He imagined stepping onto the familiar shores, embracing Penelope and seeing Telemachus grown into a man. The temptation was nearly irresistible, a world of certainty where all loss and pain could vanish with a single step. Yet he remembered Tiresias' warning: the siren's gift was a trap. Any man who yielded would never return, doomed to drift forever on the rocks below, singing for eternity. Odysseus clenched his teeth, swallowed the rising despair, and allowed the waves to carry him past, tied firmly to the mast. The men rowed with grim determination, their ears sealed with beeswax. Even as the enchanting voices swirled around them, calling to them with promises of glory and wisdom, they remained silent, their eyes fixed on the horizon. One sailor glanced at Odysseus, whose face betrayed the struggle within, the torment of wanting to listen, yet knowing the price of indulgence. The ship moved closer to the jagged rocks, the siren's song louder now, almost tangible, brushing against the sails, curling in the air like smoke. Odysseus strained against the ropes, desperate to break free, his mind on fire with desire and curiosity. The cliffs were alive with movement. Women with bird-like wings, faces radiant and haunting, voices blending into a harmony both beautiful and deadly. Minutes stretched like hours. The waves battered the hull as if testing their resolve, and the song reached its crescendo. Odysseus cried out in longing, but the ropes held firm, the men rowed with tireless force and the ship passed the rocks. Once the distance was safe, Odysseus instructed his men to remove the wax from their ears and untie him. Relief washed over the crew as they breathed freely again. Odysseus' face, though exhausted, bore a quiet triumph. The lure of the sirens had been resisted, their knowledge and promises denied. He understood the lesson the gods and fate had delivered. The sirens did not simply tempt with pleasure. They tested wisdom, patience, and discipline. Even the strongest desire, the deepest longing, could be fatal if allowed to control the mind. As the cliffs faded behind them, the sea returned to its natural rhythm. The waves were now gentle, reflecting the morning sun, yet a subtle tension lingered in the air. The siren's song remained as a memory in Odysseus' mind, a warning and a reminder. Curiosity and desire could guide a man toward knowledge or doom, and it was the choices he made, not the temptations he encountered, that determined survival. Odysseus gathered his men. "The sea offers many gifts," he said quietly, "but it also tests the heart. Remember this, strength alone is not enough. Wisdom, caution, and courage are what will bring us home." They sailed on, their spirits wary but awake, knowing that the dangers of Scylla, Charybdis, and the cattle of Helios still awaited. The sirens were behind them, yet their voices lingered in thought and memory, a shadow of the perils that lay ahead. The journey home was far from over. Every wave, every wind, and every island held a lesson, one that Odysseus and his men must learn if they were to see Ithaca once more. The sirens had sung and the living had listened, and survived. After surviving the deadly song of the sirens, Odysseus and his crew sailed onward into a part of the sea that seemed older and darker than any they had crossed. The air carried a tension that pressed on the chest, and the waves swirled with a subtle menace. The warnings of Tiresias and Circe echoed in Odysseus' mind. Ahead lay a strait between two unimaginable perils: Scylla, the six-headed monster perched upon the rocks, and Charybdis, the whirlpool that could swallow a ship whole. Odysseus gathered his men. "We have no choice," he said. "We must pass through this narrow strait. Follow my commands and we may survive. Hesitation will mean death." The men nodded, silent and tense, gripping their oars and weapons as the cliffs ahead loomed like guardians of doom. The strait came into view, a narrow channel between jagged cliffs. On one side, Scylla crouched, her 6 serpentine heads writhing, each mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glimmered with hunger. Her body, partially hidden in shadow, seemed fused with the rock itself, a living nightmare waiting to strike. On the opposite side, the sea twisted unnaturally, a dark whirlpool spiraling downward, swallowing waves and debris alike. This was Charybdis, the devouring vortex, its roar echoing like a chorus of the damned. Odysseus' heart pounded, but he held his resolve. "We must hug the cliff of Scylla," he commanded. "Better to lose a few men than the whole ship to the whirlpool." He knew the risk. Passing too close to Scylla meant certain death for those unlucky enough to be within her reach. But the alternative, the endless pull of Charybdis, was even more merciless. The men rowed with all their strength, muscles straining, sweat mingling with seawater as the ship drew closer. The sea seemed to sense their fear, tossing the vessel like a leaf caught in a storm, though the wind remained eerily still. The cries of sailors from other ships, long gone, long devoured, seemed to whisper on the waves, a grim reminder of what awaited those who faltered. Suddenly, Scylla struck. 1, 2, 3 of her heads lunged over the railing, snatching sailors from the deck. Their screams echoed as teeth tore flesh, their bodies lost to the monster in moments. Odysseus' heart sank, but he did not falter. The remaining men rowed faster, obeying his orders with grim determination, eyes fixed on the narrow escape ahead. At the same time, the waters near Charybdis churned violently. Swells rose like mountains, threatening to pull the ship downward. Odysseus shouted instructions, steering the vessel with precision, balancing the danger of the monster on one side and the whirlpool on the other. Every moment was a battle of nerves, skill, and courage. Time stretched into eternity. Waves smashed against the hull, and the monstrous heads of Scylla reached again, but only 2 more sailors were lost before the ship surged past the cliff's edge. Charybdis roared in fury, the whirlpool spinning close enough to touch the sides of the ship, but Odysseus' navigation was flawless. They emerged from the strait into calmer waters, gasping, battered, and grieving for those they had lost. Silence fell over the crew as they looked back. The strait, which had seemed so small from a distance, now appeared vast and menacing in retrospect. The rocks that had housed Scylla were scarred with the memory of the fallen, and Charybdis continued its deadly spiral, waiting for the next unsuspecting ship. Odysseus allowed himself a moment to grieve. 6 men were gone, taken by the monster, Yet the ship and the majority of the crew had survived. He understood the cruel lesson of the passage. Even the wisest and bravest must sometimes choose the lesser evil, and sacrifice is unavoidable on the path to survival. The crew continued in somber silence, their spirits heavy with grief, yet their determination renewed. Odysseus' words lingered in their minds, "The sea is merciless, but we are still alive. Every choice carries cost. Remember this and we may yet see Ithaca." As night fell, the cliffs of the strait faded behind them, and the stars emerged above the restless sea. The horizon ahead was uncertain, dark, and filled with challenges yet unseen. But Odysseus had faced gods, monsters, and the dead, and he had survived. The journey was far from over, yet each peril strengthened his resolve. The strait was behind them, but its lesson remained. The path home was never straight, and even a hero must endure loss to continue forward. The living must navigate not only the seas but the choices that define them, balancing courage, wisdom, and the cruel reality of fate. Odysseus looked to the horizon, where the next trials awaited, the temptations of Helios' sacred cattle, and beyond that, the long-awaited shores of Ithaca. Each wave, each shadow, each choice would carry him closer, or further, from home. But he sailed onward, determined to meet fate with mind and heart unbroken. After surviving the perilous strait between Scylla and Charybdis, Odysseus and his crew sailed onward, their spirits heavy with grief for those lost but their resolve unbroken. The sea, now calmer, seemed to offer a brief respite, yet the warnings of Tiresias and Circe echoed in their minds. They were approaching Thrinacia, the sacred island of Helios, the sun god, whose divine cattle grazed freely across its plains, a temptation no mortal should ever touch. Odysseus tried to steer his men away. "Do not harm the cattle," he warned, his voice heavy with urgency. "Even if the winds abandon us, even if hunger gnaws at your bones, these animals are untouchable. To harm them is to invite the wrath of the gods, and no mortal can withstand it." Yet the journey had left the men weary, hungry, and restless. 4 days the winds had been absent, leaving their ships stranded on the vast, glittering sea. Food was scarce, spirits frayed, and the longing for home became a pressure that twisted their hearts. Hunger gnawed at their resolve. Finally, after weeks of stagnation, the ship came into view of Thrinacia. Its plains shimmered in the heat, dotted with golden-brown cattle that moved lazily across the sunlit hills. The men stared in awe but also in temptation. They could taste the meat, imagine its warmth, feel the strength it could give them. Odysseus anchored the ship and urged his men to wait. "We will rest, we will fish, and we will pray. But the cattle must not be touched." He left them on the shore, confident that their discipline would hold, and returned to the ship to prepare for departure. But fate is often cruel. Odysseus, exhausted from the trials of the sea and the burden of leadership, fell asleep, trusting in the obedience of his crew. The calm of the day lulled them into carelessness. Hunger and desperation whispered stronger than reason. Eurylochus, ever bold and impatient, spoke to the men. "We are starving. Even the gods would understand if we took but a few of these beasts. One day of sin will save our lives today." The men hesitated, but the pangs of hunger were too sharp. Slowly, reluctantly they agreed. While Odysseus slept, the crew slaughtered the sacred cattle. They roasted them over fire, their hunger momentarily sated, but the act was not without consequence. The air seemed to grow heavier, the sun hotter, the sea more restless. A sense of doom settled over them, though none yet dared speak its name. No sooner had the meal ended than the heavens darkened. A storm unlike any before descended upon the island, waves taller than masts, lightning cracking across the sky. The voice of Helios thundered through the clouds. "Who has dared harm my cattle?" he demanded. "No mortal may touch what is mine." The men trembled in terror. Odysseus awoke to the screams of his crew, the roar of the wind, and the towering waves battering their ships. He cursed their disobedience, his heart heavy with grief. "We have angered the gods," he shouted. "Row for your lives." The storm consumed them. The ship, the men, the cattle, all were at the mercy of the sea god, Poseidon, who had long awaited the moment to punish Odysseus further. Waves shattered the hull, lightning struck the mast, and the roar of the ocean drowned out all cries. One by one the crew were swept away, their screams fading into the night. Only Odysseus survived, clinging to wreckage as the waters pulled him far from Thrinacia. 4 days he drifted, exhausted, battered, and alone, the memory of the sacred cattle etched into his mind as a warning. The lesson was cruel but clear. The gods demanded respect, and mortal defiance carried a price too steep to ignore. When the sea finally released him, Odysseus washed ashore on another unknown island, weak but alive. He gazed back at the horizon, where Thrinacia had faded into the mist, and felt the full weight of divine wrath. The journey to Ithaca had become not just a passage across seas, but a trial of obedience, wisdom, and survival. The sun rose, indifferent to mortal suffering, and Odysseus realized that every choice, every act of will, had consequences beyond human reckoning. The sacred cattle were gone, the crew lost, and the path home remained perilous. Yet he would continue. For he knew that survival demanded endurance, cunning, and reverence for powers far greater than man. Thrinacia would haunt him forever, a reminder that hunger, desire, and impatience could topple even the strongest hero. And so, with a body battered but spirit unbroken, Odysseus prepared to face the next trials, guided by the fragile hope of home, by the memory of the crew he could not save, and by the knowledge that the gods were ever watching, waiting for the slightest misstep. After surviving the wrath of Helios and the destruction of his crew at Thrinacia, Odysseus drifted alone on the sea, clinging to fragments of wreckage, battered and exhausted. Days passed as he floated under scorching sun and starlit skies, each wave threatening to drag him into the depths. His strength waned, his hope flickered, but his mind remained sharp, focused on one thought: home. Finally, the currents delivered him to a strange and beautiful island, shrouded in mist and surrounded by calm turquoise waters. This was Ogygia, home of Calypso, a nymph of immortal beauty whose presence radiated both danger and allure. She watched him from the cliffs as he drifted ashore, a figure of perfection framed by the sunlight and the lush, untamed vegetation. Odysseus collapsed onto the sands, utterly spent. Calypso approached with graceful steps, her long hair glinting in the sunlight, her eyes both curious and compassionate. "Stranger," she said, voice like soft music, "you have suffered much. Come, rest and recover." She led him to a hidden grotto, where warm pools reflected the golden light, and fragrant flowers perfumed the air. Days turned into weeks. Calypso provided Odysseus with food and drink, healing his wounds and restoring his strength. She offered him comfort, companionship, and even immortality, a chance to live forever, safe from storms, monsters, and the wrath of the gods. Her beauty was irresistible, her voice soothing, and her promises tempting. Many men might have forgotten home entirely in such a paradise. Yet Odysseus' heart remained anchored to Ithaca. He thought of Penelope, faithful and patient, waiting for him across the sea. He thought of Telemachus, growing older, and the kingdom that awaited his return. Even in the embrace of immortal comfort, he could not forget the life he had left behind. Calypso, sensing his longing, grew both tender and frustrated. "Why cling to a mortal life, Odysseus?" she asked. "Here you may be free from suffering, free from death. Why risk the seas, the gods, the monsters?" Odysseus looked out toward the horizon, where the sky met the waves in a distant line of hope. "Because home is not merely a place," he replied, voice steady despite exhaustion. "Home is where my heart belongs, where my family waits, where my duty lies. No comfort, no immortality can replace what I have lost, and what I seek to reclaim." Calypso listened, her gaze softening. Though her pride was wounded, she understood the truth of his words. She did not restrain him, though the power to do so was hers. She provided him with a raft, carefully constructed from the finest timber and sealed with her magic to withstand the waves. She gave him provisions and blessings for his journey, her expression a mixture of sorrow and admiration. When the raft was ready, Odysseus kissed the shore, the sand warm beneath his hands, and looked back at Calypso. "I will not forget you," he said, "nor the mercy you have shown. But Ithaca calls and I must answer." Calypso watched him drift away, her hair and robes flowing in the wind, a figure of eternal beauty framed against the setting sun. The waves carried Odysseus into the unknown, into the waters that promised both peril and the hope of home. As night fell, he rested upon the raft, gazing at the stars above. Each constellation seemed to whisper guidance, each ripple a reminder of the path he had chosen. The sea remained vast and unpredictable, yet for the first time in many months, Odysseus felt a spark of control, the knowledge that he was moving toward his destiny, not merely drifting at the mercy of fate. The island faded into the distance, shrouded in mist and mystery, a symbol of temptation, beauty, and immortality he had resisted. Odysseus sailed on, determined to face storms, monsters, and gods alike, guided by the memory of home, the strength of his heart, and the unyielding drive to reclaim the life that was his by blood, love, and fate. After days and nights adrift on the unpredictable sea, Odysseus' raft was finally swept toward a distant shore. His body was bruised and battered, his spirit weary from storms, loss, and the long solitude, yet the glimmer of land sparked a fragile hope in his heart. He approached cautiously, scanning the coastline for signs of danger or hospitality. The island of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians, emerged like a jewel from the sea. Its hills were lush and rolling, dotted with gleaming marble structures and ornate ships lined along the shores. The air smelled of salt, flowers, and fresh bread, a strange comfort after months of peril. Even the waves seemed gentler here, guiding Odysseus toward the harbor. Collapsing onto the sand, Odysseus struggled to his knees, barely able to lift his gaze, when a young maiden approached. This was Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous, dressed in fine linen and carrying a ball of cloth for washing. She had been visiting the river to launder garments when she saw the lone, bedraggled man emerging from the waves. Fearful at first, she sensed no threat in his weary posture and offered guidance. Odysseus, careful to show respect and humility, bowed low. "I am a wanderer," he said softly, voice hoarse, "shipwrecked and far from home. I seek only kindness and aid." Nausicaa, moved by his plight, led him through the forest to her father's palace. Along the way, Odysseus admired the beauty of the island. Pristine rivers, flowering meadows, and neatly terraced hills. The Phaeacians' lives seemed touched by both simplicity and elegance, a people in harmony with sea and land, skilled in both navigation and craft. Inside the palace, King Alcinous and Queen Arete welcomed Odysseus with warmth and curiosity. He recounted little of his journey at first, showing deference and caution, knowing the importance of trust and discretion. The Phaeacians listened intently, offering food, water, and a safe place to rest. Odysseus' wounds were tended, his strength gradually returning, and for the first time in years, he felt the comfort of shelter and care. The days passed, and Odysseus shared stories of distant lands, careful to embellish or withhold certain truths. The Phaeacians were enchanted, particularly by his tales of the sea, monsters, and gods. They admired his cunning, his resilience, and his unwavering desire to return home. The king, impressed, promised a ship and a skilled crew to escort him safely to Ithaca. The day of departure arrived. Odysseus stood at the prow of the Phaeacian ship, the wind filling the sails, his eyes tracing the coastline he had come to cherish. Nausicaa and the royal family waved from the shore, their faces glowing with both joy and farewell. Gifts were given, gold, fine linens, and provisions for the journey, tokens of friendship and respect. As the ship sailed into open waters, Odysseus reflected on the contrast between Scheria and the trials he had faced. Here was a people untouched by envy or cruelty, skilled in navigation yet generous in spirit. It was a rare reminder that the world, despite its dangers, also held kindness and grace. The journey across the sea was swift, the Phaeacian sailors expertly guiding the vessel through waves and currents. Odysseus, at the helm for a brief moment, felt a fleeting sense of freedom, the sea no longer a hostile force but a path to reunion. Nights under the stars brought reflection. The constellations guided them as they had guided him through storms and shadows before. Finally, the long-sought shores of Ithaca appeared, familiar yet distant, cloaked in the soft hues of evening. Odysseus' heart surged with emotion, relief, anticipation, and the knowledge that after decades of wandering, the trials were nearing their end. The Phaeacians brought him ashore in secret, mindful of the challenges that awaited him at home, and vanished into the night before Odysseus could speak more than a word of thanks. On the quiet shores of Ithaca, Odysseus knelt and kissed the ground. The air smelled of earth, olives, and the sea he had longed for through years of exile. He felt the weight of time and experience settle over him, yet also a renewed determination. The journey had tested every skill, every ounce of courage, every beat of his heart. Now he would face the final trials, reclaiming his home, confronting those who had betrayed his household and reuniting with Penelope. For Odysseus, the Phaeacians were more than guides. They were a reminder that even in a world ruled by gods and monsters, mortals could find refuge, friendship, and aid. Their kindness had bridged the final gap between exile and home, and for that he carried both gratitude and respect as he stepped forward, ready to confront the destiny that awaited him on Ithaca's shores. The sea lay calm behind him, the stars above serene, and the land ahead held the promise of reunion, justice, and the peace that comes after long, hard-won trials. Odysseus' journey, though nearly complete, had forever changed him. A hero tempered by loss, perseverance, and the wisdom of countless dangers survived. At long last Odysseus' ship touched the shores of Ithaca, the land he had dreamed of for decades. The coastline, rugged and familiar, greeted him with quiet dignity, olive groves swaying in the evening breeze, the scent of home filling the air. After years of wandering, after facing monsters, gods, temptation, and the dead themselves, he had returned to the kingdom he had left in turmoil, to the wife who had endured, and to the palace overrun by strangers. Odysseus disembarked in secret, his appearance disguised as a humble beggar, aided by the goddess Athena, who cloaked him in shadows and whispered counsel in his ear. He moved through Ithaca cautiously, observing the suitors who had taken over his halls, feasting on his wealth and courting Penelope, who remained steadfast and wise despite years of waiting. The arrogance of these men fueled Odysseus' resolve. Each laugh, each careless word, reminded him of the violation of his home, and strengthened the plan he had forged in patience and cunning. Penelope appeared in the courtyard, her face still radiating intelligence and grace. Though weary from years of uncertainty, she remained vigilant, aware of the suitor's folly. Odysseus, even in disguise, studied her from a distance. Every line of her face, every gesture, confirmed the truth that had guided him through storms, monsters, and trials. She had waited. She had endured. She had remained loyal, the beacon of his journey, the reason he had survived. The moment for confrontation arrived. Odysseus entered the great hall, still cloaked, and challenged the suitors to a test of skill, the famous bow of Odysseus, a weapon only he could wield. Murmurs spread through the hall. The men tried and failed, their arrogance and weakness laid bare. Then Odysseus, still disguised, took up the bow. With a single effortless draw, he sent an arrow through all 12 axes, a feat no man alive could replicate. The room fell silent. The moment of reckoning had come. With a swift, calculated motion, Odysseus removed his disguise, revealing the king returned. The suitors, caught in a mixture of shock and terror, scrambled to arms, but it was too late. Athena lent strength and precision to Odysseus' movements. One by one the suitors fell, their arrogance and betrayal punished. Blood and fire marked the end of their intrusion, and the palace was reclaimed in justice and fury. After the battle, Odysseus sought out Penelope, who approached with cautious hope, testing the truth of his identity. He spoke of their shared bed, built with knowledge only they could possess, a proof that shattered all doubt. Recognition dawned in her eyes and tears flowed freely. The long separation, the years of suffering and longing, ended in silence, embrace, and finally reunion. Odysseus then faced the remaining challenges of his kingdom: the loyal servants who had remained steadfast, the disloyal who had conspired with the suitors, and the townsfolk who had been caught between fear and admiration. Justice was meted with wisdom, balancing mercy and discipline. Ithaca, under Odysseus' rule once more, began to heal from the wounds inflicted during his absence. In the quiet that followed, Odysseus walked through his palace, now empty of intruders, reflecting on the journey that had spanned 20 years. He had faced divine wrath, mythical creatures, and mortal weakness. He had learned the limits of endurance, the power of cunning, and the strength of loyalty. Every loss, every hardship, every narrow escape had led to this moment, the restoration of home, family, and kingdom. Finally, Odysseus and Penelope stood together on the shores of Ithaca, looking out over the waters that had carried him for so long. The wind was calm, the waves gentle, the stars beginning to pierce the night sky. There were no monsters now, no temptations, no threats, only the knowledge that after endless trials, patience, courage, and fidelity had been rewarded. Odysseus' journey had ended not with glory alone, but with understanding. He had survived because he had learned humility, endurance, and wisdom. Ithaca was his not merely by birth, but by the choices he had made, the courage he had shown, and the loyalty he had honored. The hero who had faced gods, monsters, and the very forces of fate now walked home, whole, tempered, and ready to rule with the experience that only a lifetime of trials could grant. The long Odyssey was over. The king had returned. Justice was restored. And the homecoming, hard-earned and richly deserved, marked the triumph of endurance, wisdom, and the human spirit against all odds.